This meeting of the Subcommittee on Surface Transportation, Freight, Pipelines, and Safety will come to order. Good morning, and welcome to this hearing, where we will discuss an issue of national importance, the safety, innovation, and future of America's railways. As Congress looks toward the next surface transportation reauthorization, this hearing is a timely opportunity to examine the current state of our freight and passenger rail networks. Our rail networks are important to both our economy and our national security as they move energy, goods, and people across the country. So I'm excited today to consider policy and regulatory reforms that support a modern national rail policy, specifically ways to modernize our rail ecosystem with a focus on improving safety, boosting efficiency, fostering innovation, and ensuring this ecosystem can meet the demands of the present and the future. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today and extend a special thanks to Mr. Gilbertson of Anacostia Rail Holdings Company for representing the state of Indiana through the Chicago South Shore and South Bend Railroad and the Louisville and Indiana Railroad. As I mentioned, rail is the backbone of our transportation system and our economy. It connects communities, moves freight efficiently, and supports thousands of jobs. From small towns to major cities, rail keeps America moving. Our freight rail ecosystem is certainly among the most efficient in the world, but is not averse to an aging infrastructure and growing demand. So we should be pragmatic and examine how to make improvements. To meet the demands of the future, we must invest in adequate infrastructure, understand where bottlenecking hurts our supply chains and delays the transport of goods and consumers, and support the skilled workforce that powers our railroads. We must also examine how advancements in technology can address challenges we currently see. Technology is already making a difference. Systems like positive train control, or PTC, are designed to prevent train-to-train collisions, overspeed derailment, incursions into established work zones, and movements of trains through switches left in the wrong position. And now, new tools like AI-powered track monitoring, automated inspections, and predictive maintenance offer even greater potential to prevent issues before becoming problems. Take, for example, inspection portals, which use high-resolution machine vision and AI to complement manual detection work to understand where defects may exist. This technology is a prime example of how AI can help our workforce maintain rail cars with greater efficiency and potentially increase safety, while at the same time reducing constraints in delivery or service time. These advancements can increase reliability, reduce delays, save money, and increase safety for railroad workers and the public. Whether in freight or passenger rail, real-time data and proactive maintenance are keys to a resilient network. But innovation cannot flourish if outdated or duplicative regulations get in the way. Many existing rules are prohibitive to testing or deploying technology, or can slow down safety upgrades and infrastructure improvements. A more agile, modern regulatory framework will help the rail industry innovate and adopt new technologies faster without compromising safety. At the same time, we can't lose sight of the needs of hard infrastructure. Replacing aging tracks, modernizing bridges, upgrading rail signal systems, and improving rail yards are foundational to both safety and economic competitiveness. These investments help goods move faster, more reliably, and at lower costs. Every year, rail crossings see devastating and oftentimes preventable accidents. Smarter warning systems, better barriers, and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication can reduce risks and save lives. So, as we have this conversation, safety must remain our top priority. All of this is made possible by our rail workforce. Investing in training, modern safety protocols, and new technology ensures workers are prepared for the demands of a modern system. Their expertise is essential to safety and performance. Our approach must be all-encompassing to embrace new technologies, invest in critical infrastructure, empower the workforce, and modernize regulations. And we must work to encourage public-private partnerships to accomplish these goals. With more than 4,500 miles of freight and passenger rail, my state of Indiana plays a central role in national logistics. Projects like the South Shore Line and West Lake Corridor show how public-private partnerships can deliver big results, enhancing safety and regional connectivity. So the witnesses on today's panel are well-suited to discuss each of these critical issues. And I look forward to a thoughtful conversation to help jumpstart our work to reauthorize surface transportation programs. Thank you again for being here, and I now recognize my good friend and partner on this subcommittee, Ranking Member Peters, for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that, and welcome to our four witnesses here before us today. We look forward to your testimony on how Congress can build on some previous investments that we made to strengthen our railroad system to ensure that we can safely and efficiently transport both goods and people. Americans rely on the U.S. rail network to safely move roughly 28 million passengers and 1.6 billion tons of goods each and every year. And no state better exemplifies the reality of and the opportunities for passenger and freight rail than my home state of Michigan. Michigan is home to roughly 3,900 miles of track, including more than 600 miles of state-owned rail lines managed by the Michigan Department of Transportation, as well as 29 private freight rail operators and companies. Michigan is also home to 3 Amtrak lines that operate throughout our state. And as home of the auto industry and the heart of American manufacturing, Michigan's freight rail network delivers cars, agricultural products, construction materials, and everyday goods all over our state as well as across international borders. Michigan is also leading the way when it comes to passenger rail. The Michigan Department of Transportation has effectively taken advantage of resources that Congress provided to improve passenger rail service. This includes efforts to restore Amtrak service to the historic Michigan Central Station in downtown Detroit and to expand that service across the Canadian border into Windsor in the coming years, a project that I'm going to continue to fight for. Continued investment in passenger rail infrastructure and capacity is absolutely essential to realizing this vision and to improving the growing services across our national network. It must be a key priority for Congress and in the next surface transportation reauthorization bill. But let's be clear, Michigan's rail infrastructure progress is largely thanks to the investments we made in the bipartisan infrastructure law. The bipartisan infrastructure law invested a historic $102 billion for rail infrastructure, including funding for the federal-state partnership for passenger rail grant program and the Corridor ID program, as well as the creation of critical new programs like the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program. This funding has specifically allowed Michigan to conduct the analysis and the planning that they need to support future expansion of passenger rail on all 3 of our Amtrak lines, the Wolverine, the Blue Water, and the Pierre Marquette. The Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program we created is also improving safety and efficiency across Michigan communities. It's helping the city of Monroe improve response times for emergency response, as well as ease traffic congestion. It's funding the elimination of a dangerous rail crossing in Trenton, Michigan. It's consolidating 3 railroad crossings at a key intersection on Lanyo and Central Streets in Detroit to improve safety, mobility, and freight transportation throughout the region. And it's giving Manistee and Kalamazoo the runway they need to plan for the removal of harmful crossings that are causing issues for their residents. Michigan is certainly not alone. Communities across the country have benefited from increased resources to strengthen their rail infrastructure, but this work is far from over. Programs like Corridor ID and Railroad Crossing Elimination Grants can only reach their full potential if we follow up with continued investment to ensure projects that are already underway are not abandoned midway. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the impact this investment is having on the ground and the importance of maintaining these programs for the rail network. And finally, we know that a fundamental part of strengthening our rail system is taking necessary steps to make it safer. We've seen that when railroad safety is compromised, entire communities suffer. We all witnessed that with the East Palestine train derailment in 2023, but there are many more close calls that don't make the news. And our communities are calling for action to prevent tragedy from impacting their residents. One such case is in Romulus, a city in southeast Michigan that has seen multiple train derailments over the past 5 years. We received testimony for the record from Romulus Mayor Robert McCrate, and I would like to enter that into the record without objection, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
The testimony sheds light on his community's firsthand experience with derailments, where first responder safety was put in jeopardy because they were not properly informed of hazmat cargo in the derailed cars. He's calling for congressional action. And that's why last Congress I supported the Railway Safety Act, which addressed key concerns like first responder communication and preparation, wayside detection improvements, inspection standards, and two-crew requirements, and much more. Last Congress, we also laid groundwork for bipartisan action to address concerns that emerged from East Palestine crash. And it's my hope that this committee will be able to act in the same bipartisan manner once again. I'd like to take a moment to thank the Shiawassee Economic Development Partnership, the County of Manistee, and the other Michigan stakeholders reaching out to my office to share their perspective on the needs for their rail system. And I look forward to hearing from each and every one of you here today and how we can take steps to build on the bipartisan infrastructure law and ensure the safety of our national rail network. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I know our full committee chairman, Senator Cruz, wants to make every effort to be here. I believe he will be here later. But in the meanwhile, I will recognize Ranking Member Cantwell for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Young, and thank you to you and Senator Peters for having this important hearing today, and to our witnesses. I'm glad that we're having such an important hearing at such an important time. In my state, rail is critical. 1.3 million people and over 100 million tons of freight, over $30 billion travel by rail in Washington state every year. So as Congress begins to consider a surface transportation reauthorization, we need to do three things: increase rail investment, including rail crossing investment to move products quickly and safely. I like in your testimony, Mr. Anthony, how you say that safety starts with the Commerce Committee. I think your subhead is rail safety starts and ends with the Commerce Committee. Thank you for that. That's very important. And also, you had a subhead, rail safety impacts small cities disproportionately in clear trend lines of hazardous incidents. So again, shows you what is at stake when it comes to safety. Our poor smaller towns just don't have the ability to respond, and East Palestine showed that. Strengthening safety requirements to prevent derailments, which have more than doubled in the state of Washington in the last decade. We've obviously had increase in traffic, but we've also had increase in derailment, and continue robust funding for passenger rail programs and Amtrak. I do like Mr. Gilbert, in your testimony, calling out the short haul system. Obviously, we need to continue to have improvements. These are the backbones of moving a lot of product, a lot of agricultural product to get to ports as well. So ports in the state of Washington export over $19 billion worth of agricultural products every year. $19 billion. Of this, $11 billion worth of those products, such as soybean, wheat, corn, come from other states. So we're basically doing the work of getting this Midwest product to international destinations. That includes delivering product from Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, and Missouri, and I gotta believe Indiana, although it's not on here, but I gotta believe, Mr. Chairman, that there's something that we deliver. Due to our rail network, farmers in the Midwest and Ohio River Valley markets can get their products to Washington ports onto the international markets in just 3 to 5 days. That is why we want to make sure that we don't see the congestion or the canceling. Thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we made critical investments in this supply chain. We increased rail capacity at the Port of Kalama, one of the largest grain exporters on the West Coast, which will increase efficiency by 20 to 30%. And we are rehabilitating the Washington State grain train, which carries 20 to 25% of Washington's wheat each year, allowing the line to move heavier cars at twice the speed. And the next bill must increase the investment in freight if we're going to keep U.S. products moving. Just this past week, we had a tragic reminder, though, about why rail safety is so important. In my hometown of Edmonds, Washington, a person was killed on the tracks, and I offer my condolences to the family and loved ones of that individual. As a result of this tragedy, the freight train stopped on the tracks for 2 hours, and you might think, well, what is that? Necessarily, for sure. But it just happened to also block the Edmonds ferry. So our crossing right there then stopped the ferry, a big part of our highway marine system, from delivering passengers unable to disembark or throwing off the ferry schedule. In fact, earlier this week, the Seattle Times ran a photo of ferry passengers climbing across the stopped train to get to the docks. So it just shows you the complexity of the interface of at-grade crossings. This is so incredibly dangerous, and the people were just trying to get to dock or just enjoy the waterfront, not realizing how perilous this really was. That is why I created the $3 billion railroad crossing elimination program in the bipartisan infrastructure law, along with my colleague, Senator Blunt, to try to address these at-grade crossings and allow cities to not be as managed from a top-down DOT process, but have this come from the bottom up so communities could try to help themselves. I think the program has definitely been oversubscribed. The need for funding is great. Since 2021, FRA has received $4.5 billion in eligible applications for the grade crossing elimination program, nearly 3 times the funding that has been made available so far. So as we discuss the next surface transportation authorization, ensuring this program is fully funded, I think, should be a priority. We must also do more to prevent trains carrying hazardous materials from derailing in our communities, and this is critically important to the state of Washington, where 1.6 billion gallons of crude oil are transported by rail through our communities and across the state. In February, I wrote to Chairman Cruz on the 2nd anniversary of East Palestine derailment, urging him to advance legislation to ensure that we've learned the lessons from this tragedy. The Rail Safety Act, which was authored by now Vice President Vance and passed out of the committee last Congress with bipartisan support, included important provisions that could have prevented the tragic disaster in East Palestine and will improve the safety of crude oil trains in the state of Washington. I think this should be part of the surface transportation reauthorization. And finally, when it comes to Amtrak and the I-5 corridor, this service is critical to helping what we believe will be 750,000 fans visiting Seattle to move around the region at the 2026 FIFA World Cup. So this issue is critically important, and thanks to federal investment in passenger rail at Amtrak Cascades, we will get new passenger rail cars next year to improve the reliability of that experience. The next bill must also ensure Amtrak and states receive predictable funding so we can have the long-term capital investments in passenger rail. So I look forward to working with both of you and with Chairman Cruz and how Congress can support rail, freight, and passenger and ensure safety in our cities and towns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Cantwell. As the proud co-chair of the Senate Soccer Caucus, I have yet another value proposition to ensure rail safety here today, as if I didn't need more, because this is such an important hearing. So Senator Cruz will be with us for questions. The show will go on. I'd like to introduce our witnesses for today. Each of them brings deep knowledge and firsthand experience from the freight and passenger rail industries. Our first witness is Mr. Ian Jeffries, President and CEO of the Association of American Railroads. He brings over a decade of experience in transportation policy, including roles at federal agencies and the Senate Commerce Committee. Our second witness is Mr. Peter Gilbertson, President and CEO of the Anacostia Rail Holdings Company, a holding company for short line railroads, several of which are in the great state of Indiana. He's here on behalf of the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association. Our third witness today is Mr. Hussein Cumber, Senior Advisor of Brightline Holdings, where he supports the development of high-speed and inner-city passenger rail projects. Mr. Cumber brings years of experience in rail infrastructure, having held leadership roles in both the public and private sectors. Our final witness is Mr. Clarence Anthony. Mr. Anthony is the CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities, which represents and advocates for local governments at this federal level. I will recognize Mr. Jeffries to deliver your opening statement. Mr. Jeffries, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Young, Ranking Member Peters, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on modernizing the rail network. I'm President and CEO of the Association of American Railroads, where we represent the nation's major freight railroads. And I'm honored to discuss the vital role our industry plays and policies that will drive progress. Freight rail is a cornerstone of the U.S. economy. Safe, efficient, and robustly funded. Railroads build, maintain, and invest in their own network to the tune of nearly $25 billion in annual investment. This level of self-sufficiency is unmatched in the transportation sector and ensures that railroads remain a reliable backbone in the supply chain. It also tracks one-to-one with safety. Railroads today lead major industries in worker safety, safer in trucking, airlines, manufacturing, construction, and agriculture, just to name a few. And while the last decade has been the safest in our entire history, with significant declines in train accidents and employee injuries, further progress is a necessity. Economically, freight rail supports nearly every single industry, moving more than 1.6 billion tons of goods each year. That's 40% of long-haul freight. From agricultural products to automobiles, chemicals to consumer goods, railroads connect communities and businesses across the country and beyond. Railroads' efficiency saves businesses billions annually and enhances U.S. global competitiveness. With real rates falling 42% over the last 4 decades, we are an ally in the fight against inflation. As this committee begins to consider the next surface reauthorization bill, we encourage Congress to prioritize policies to uphold our ability to invest in infrastructure, support innovation, and advance data-driven safety improvements. Reauthorization is a key moment to modernize our safety framework. Various forms of inspection technology enable more frequent, precise monitoring that improves safety and efficiency across the network. Yet this industry is often still beholden to regulations published in the 1970s or even earlier. Congress has a great opportunity to embrace performance-based regulations that reward outcomes, not outdated processes. Technology is also redefining how rail integrates with global logistics. Real-time GPS, AI-driven scheduling, predictive analytics to increase customer visibility, reduce congestion, and improve service. But regulators must catch up. Outcome-focused policy and streamlined waiver and pilot processes would help rail deliver a safe, efficient system that businesses and communities rely on. Additionally, programs such as the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program are crucial to improve grade crossing safety and reducing community impacts. Multimodal programs like Infra and Mega are also improving freight flows throughout the country, not to mention rail-specific programs like CRISI, which I know my colleague will get into more details on. And while robust funding is key, timely execution of dollars is just as important. Streamlining grant application, review, and award processes, paired with common sense permitting reforms, are critical in this reauthorization. And more broadly, Congress must address the insolvency of the Highway Trust Fund. Estimates show that without legislative action, the trust fund will face insolvency by 2028, accumulating a $280 billion deficit by 2034. Clearly, the current gas tax model is insufficient and not sustainable, and such heavy subsidy requirements throw the competitive framework out of whack with our primary competitor. Modernizing to an equitable weight and/or distance-based user fee system or other models are sensible paths to consider for the future. And let's remember that lawmakers initiated this shift in the last transportation bill, but implementation at the DOT is stalled. Further, Congress must also reject calls to increase truck size and weight limits, which would only exacerbate funding gaps, degrade roads, and further increase congestion on our already clogged highways. Again, it's about a level playing field when it comes to competition. Working together, though, these policies will help railroads drive the economy forward, support safety, service, and innovation. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Mr. Gilbertson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Young, and thank you, Senator Peters and Moreno. It's happy to be here. I'm Peter Gilbertson, President and CEO of Anacostia Rail Holdings. We operate 6 short-line railroads in 7 states, including Indiana and Minnesota and Illinois. I'm appearing on behalf of the American Shortline and Regional Railroad Association, which represents 603 Class II and III railroads. Together, these railroads operate 50,000 miles of track, or about 30% of the national network. They operate in 49 states, and the one that we don't operate in is Hawaii. We'd be interested in operating in there if there's any opportunity. We are the industry's growth engine. Short lines are entrepreneurial small businesses. The typical short line employs about 30 people, operates about 80 miles, and earns about $8 million in annual revenue. Our significance, though, is not our size, but who and where we serve. We serve rural America, we serve ports, we serve defense facilities, we serve underserved areas. We're the first and last mile in many cases. In this role, we face some unique challenges: aging infrastructure, limited revenue, complex regulatory requirements, constrained access to capital. My written testimony covers 3 areas that address these challenges: continued and robust, predictable federal infrastructure financing, regulatory reform that is data and risk-driven and not prescriptive, and then finally support for innovation and new technologies through streamlined testing, waivers, and investment. Most short lines operate over track that was headed for abandonment before their time, and because of that, they understandably received little or no capital investment, so there's a lot of deferred maintenance in the network we operate. We have to invest, on average, about 30% of our annual revenue in maintaining and rehabilitating our infrastructure, which makes short lines one of the most capital-intensive industries in the country. The CRISI program of the US DOT, FRA, is the only federal program that allows direct access to capital for short line infrastructure improvements. It has been very successful. Of the 240 CRISI awards made to date, over $2.7 billion has gone to projects benefiting short lines. In the 23-24 round, short lines received 81 out of 122 awards. These were matched by private investment, non-federal investment, from 20 to 80% of the total project cost. So this leverages funds into the infrastructure of the United States beyond just the federal investment. We encourage you to extend the program in the next surface transportation reauthorization, and my testimony makes several recommendations to improve the program. 2 are particularly important. One is advanced appropriations, because it permits us to plan. Second, while we commend the FRA staff for processing these things, there's been delays between the announcement of the grant and the actual funding of the program. And the process actually includes a grant agreement as part of the application. So we think there's opportunities to substantially shorten that period. Safety is the next thing I want to touch on. It's a fundamental value to us. Our employees and the communities we serve are crucial to us, and it's a fundamental value. But we believe FRA could take some specific actions to reduce the regulatory burden. My colleague has addressed some of these things, but I'll give an example. The FRA signal and employee dispatcher certification regulations had cost-benefit ratios of 8-to-1 and 3-to-1, respectively. In other words, the cost exceeded benefits, and this was by FRA's own calculations. This is the kind of thing that we think we can have a more creative approach to our safety objectives. Finally, we have an old industry here. It's 150 years old, and we must embrace innovation. There are significant opportunities to improve what we're doing in technology, and I'll give you one example that I think is germane both to CRISI, but also some of the technology that's occurring. One of our railroads, the Louisville in Indiana, between Indianapolis and Louisville, Kentucky, has been developing, with the assistance of CRISI and our own funds, an app that permits us to talk to first responders and show first responders, if there's a grade crossing incident, exactly where it's occurring, so that there isn't confusion about responding quickly. Once we complete that, and we're very close to that, we will share that with other railroads in the United States. This is an example of, and obviously we're not developing the app, we're working with others to develop it, but it's the kind of entrepreneurship I think you see in short lines. There's a problem, let's step up and try to fix it. And the federal funds have been crucial to that. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbertson. Mr. Cumber, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Young, Ranking Member Peters, Senator Moreno, and other members of the subcommittee. As Senior Advisor of Brightline Holdings and one of the people who developed the vision for this company, I'm honored to be here to highlight the achievements of Brightline Florida and Brightline West, discuss the future of passenger rail service, identify challenges facing the development of additional passenger rail systems in America, and share some potential solutions. Brightline Florida is the only private passenger rail system in the country constructed in the last 100 years. Building upon important lessons from Florida, we are now developing Brightline West, which will connect Southern California and Las Vegas. Brightline Florida started as an idea in 2011. As we looked at successful passenger rail systems globally, it became clear that a 250 to 300 mile corridor was the ideal length. This distance connects city pairs that what we call are too far to drive, but too close to fly. To date, we have invested more than $6 billion of private capital in Brightline, Florida. Our 6 stations will soon be joined by 2 new stations in communities where local elected officials have recognized the advantage of being connected to our rail system. Our Florida system also includes 10 American-made train sets. Looking back over our history, we now recognize lessons learned from several challenges that all projects of this scale must overcome to be successful. First, privately developed intercity passenger rail projects would benefit from being directly eligible for US DOT and Federal Railroad Administration discretionary grants. The industry also would benefit from a more streamlined discretionary grant process. 2, cost-effective access to right-of-way is essential. Third, completion of environmental approvals in a timely manner. And 4th, access to low-cost debt is required to build greenfield, first-of-its-kind projects. The Senate Commerce Committee has recognized that all modes of transportation need to be supported through discretionary grant programs. Effective grant oversight requires direct engagement with the entity implementing a project. The CRISI grant program is the only one that allows private companies to apply for federal funding as a prime recipient. Under other FRA and USDOT grant programs, private companies can still receive funds, but must do so through a public intermediary. In this scenario, the public entity passes through the funds and reporting obligations. This unnecessary additional layer can compromise the effectiveness of USDOT monitoring, reporting, and audit procedures. Many public entities will simply refuse to sit between USDOT and a private company implementing a major greenfield project like high-speed rail. At minimum, the Fed-State Partnership Program's applicant eligibility language should match that of the CRISI program. In an ideal scenario, all USDOT discretionary grant programs should have their applicant eligibility language harmonized. Additionally, the subcommittee should look at consolidating some or all of the FRA discretionary grant programs into a combined calendar. This consolidation would streamline the entire FRA grant process by eliminating the need to continuously issue notice of funding opportunities, review grant submissions, and negotiate grant agreements continuously throughout the year. The use of existing transportation corridors is fundamental to our business thesis. Re-examination of the permitting and approval process is an opportunity for improvement. 2 changes that would create a more efficient process are, first, to provide additional NEPA delegation authority to states for passenger rail projects, And two, to provide US DOT clear authority for issuing categorical exclusions for infrastructure projects that are constructed in an existing transportation corridor. Accessing significant capital to support the cost and the lengthy construction schedule of new infrastructure projects remains a key challenge. We successfully utilized the private activity bond market as our primary capital source, and it proved to be successful. Increase in the private activity bond cap in the transportation reauth bill from $30 billion to $45 billion is necessary not just for rail projects, but managed lanes and other surface transportation projects. In addition to private activity bonds, the Railroad Rehabilitation Infrastructure Financing Program has tremendous potential to unlock private sector capital for infrastructure. There should be a process whereby RIF is more streamlined if an equal amount of the capital stack includes private sector equity and debt from qualified financial institutions. I would be remiss if I did not reinforce the importance of maintaining, if not increasing, the funding levels for rail discretionary grant programs. I want to end by inviting you all to come to Florida and take a ride to see what we've built. I'm proud of the more than 600 teammates of Brightline Florida that have built a product that is leading a passenger rail renaissance in America. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. I think you'll have many takers in visiting Florida among those listening. Mr. Anthony, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Young, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. I'm here today on behalf of the nation's more than 12,000 cities, towns, and villages that have tracks running through their neighborhoods and their downtowns. I'd like to begin today by putting safety first and thanking this committee for your leadership on safety programs in the IIJA that are saving American lives every day. The new rail crossing elimination grants and the Safe Streets grants, both championed in this committee, are being put to work in communities of every size in America. And the results are clear. Traffic deaths and rail incidents are finally trending down. So let's keep up these essential safety efforts in the reauthorization ahead of us. The National League of Cities believes national rail investments are on track, but we need to keep up the momentum. This means investing in the corridors we serve today and identified in the Corridor ID program. With the certainty of advance appropriations, capital investment in passenger rail service in the U.S. is showing great gains. Amtrak had its best year yet in 2024, with more capital projects, customers, and record revenue than ever before, and they're on track to do the same in 2025. However, not everything is on track. More than 4,000 trains have derailed since 2020, with nearly 70% of derailments happening inside cities, particularly small cities. The 2023 Norfolk Southern train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, was a jarring reminder for all cities and towns about how quickly a train coming through can derail with hazardous materials on board, harming both their towns and the economic potential for years to come. The Norfolk derailment is not unprecedented. It follows a trend of hazardous material derailments in Draffin, Fort Worth, Maryville, Paulsboro, and amongst others. Experts have made it clear that derailments are preventable with good maintenance, safety standards, and, of course, technology. Congress is the only level of government full and unquestionable authority to establish the rail safety improvements needed for American communities, emergency responders, rail workers, and, of course, rail customers. We are deeply appreciative of everything that this committee has done to set safety performance bar higher. City leaders that have dealt with derailments echo one common message: no other community should have to go through this preventable disaster. And with safety inspections, investments, incentives, Congress could make our communities safer and make railroads more profitable by keeping the trains on the tracks where they belong. So, in order to show that we are partners, we made 8 recommendations. One, adopt and fund expert NTSB's recommendation on rail safety. Two, invest in rail crossing elimination program to improve the flow of rail traffic and local transportation traffic so that these are not blocked, the crossings aren't. Three, provide long-term rail funding certainty through advance appropriations or other means that keep the momentum for the Corridor ID program going, which has many great projects we want to move. Four, lower the cost of rail infrastructure material and structure through innovation and experimentation funding because the cost of rail infrastructure has doubled in the last couple of years. Five, modernize safety data and blocked crossing reporting. Six, support safety information flow between the railroads, city leadership, and of course, our local first responders. Seven, establish an FRA liaison for railroads and communities. And finally, and most importantly, maintain and modernize rail inspections. We need to recognize that technology can support inspections, but it cannot safely supplant them. And so thank you on behalf of the National League of Cities and the 12,000 cities in America. We're here to partner.
Well, thank you to Mr. Anthony and to all our witnesses for those opening statements. Very thoughtful. As I mentioned in my own opening statement, technology is already making a big difference in the way we approach safety in the rail ecosystem. But I do believe that emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning hold the potential to drastically improve our rail ecosystem by increasing safety and efficiency, probably in a number of ways that none of us can predict at this point. But this hearing, I think, is a great opportunity as we prepare our work on surface reauthorization to improve upon opportunities for the greater voluntary deployment of emerging technology. Mr. Jeffries, thanks for your testimony again. You mentioned a few applications of technology, but I wanted to dig in a little deeper on how exactly you've seen technology like automated track inspection, something we've discussed, or anything else that is improving safety and efficiency. Can you shine a light onto this for us?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the question. And I think you heard some version of that same theme throughout all the witnesses, so that's a good sign. But dialing into autonomous track inspection in particular. So right now, and I mentioned, our regulatory structure has been around for a long time, and we've got a lot of 1970s era regulations. We've got regulations from the steam engine era that we're operating under. But when it comes to track inspection, we have in most of our inspection protocols, a very manually focused protocol about how and when to inspect our tracks that generally requires a segment of a line to be shut down and individuals to walk the track using the naked eye looking for potential flaws. And that was the best way to do that when the regulations were established some time ago. Well, as with every other industry, this industry's continued to evolve and develop new technology and innovate and find new, better ways to do things. And so the principal characteristics of ATI are that, one, you can affix an autonomous track inspection tool to a revenue service train, so you're not taking that line out of service. You are continuously inspecting the line as you're moving through revenue service, so you're covering more ground, you're doing it more frequently, and you're doing it at a higher level of sophistication. In early pilot programs at the FRA, 90% improvement in defect detection occurred using ATI versus the naked eye. That shouldn't be surprising to any of us, but that's the fact. And so our thesis with using ATI as the example is let's continue to build the data sets appropriate to prove out. We think we've proven it out, but let's take sequential steps to further prove out that using ATI in lieu or in addition to a manual inspection will result in a higher level of safety. And as that is proven out by the data, then there should be a smooth, predictable, objective process for rolling that new, better way of doing things into the regulation to meet a regulatory requirement. And we think that's through an outcomes-based approach. So tell me the performance standard you want to meet and allow me to figure out the best way to meet that or exceed that, and we should all get the outcome we're looking for. Thank you.
Sort of a fundamental regulatory principle that many of us have tried to embrace. Don't be prescriptive, but instead rely on people's creativity and technology and thoughtfulness, who are frankly more connected to these challenges than sometimes people in Washington are, to come up with a solution. Mr. Gilbertson, Mr. Cumber, do either of you have anything to add as it relates to this technology question?
I just mentioned the interplay between, for example, the CRISI program and technology. I mentioned this app, but another good example is RailPulse. RailPulse is a consortium of large and small railroads, and it provides a tag on rail cars that provide both safety and customer information to the user. We just joined the consortium. It, again, was seeded by a CRISI grant several years ago. And I think the part that appealed to FRA was, again, both customer value and safety improvement. We just bought, Senator, 100 new rail cars to serve the steel industry in Indiana. We're tagging all those cars with this new technology. And it's a quantum leap in where is that car located. We know exactly where it's located. So these are the kinds of things that I think are out there. And again, there is an interplay between the funding and the technology.
Yes. Mr. Cumber?
Two short examples, Mr. Chairman. So with respect to Brightline and what we're doing, one area where evolving regulatory thinking could help is current regulations for broken rail detection are emerging as a roadblock for higher speed trains. So for example, European high-speed rail networks depend on preventative measures to address the risk of broken rail conditions. And the preventative measures include an inspection vehicle that checks the track every morning before service starts. And so what you're doing is preventing a broken rail condition by using high-resolution cameras that monitor and detect rail flaws before they can grow in significance. The current U.S. regulations require the installation of track circuits to identify when a broken rail condition has happened. But we need to change the regulatory thinking and look at ways on how we make sure we're preventing the broken rail condition from actually happening, not monitoring when it actually happens. Second, very quickly, is I'm on the board of Parallel Systems, which is the first company that has designed an autonomous battery electric rail vehicle that can travel up to 500 miles. We got the first waiver from the Federal Railroad Administration, started the pilot in Georgia 2 weeks ago. And for more than a year, we struggled to get permission from the FRA to test the vehicle because of antiquated regulations that require self-powered vehicles to have bathrooms and windshields. And so this is where technology is leaped ahead of the regulations in statute. And so
you don't think a self-powered vehicle needs a windshield?
And so self-powered rail car, right? Yeah. And so, but what's interesting about these cars is they're designed to be able to monitor wheel bearing temperatures 30 times per second. They can stop much quickly than other rail cars. And so you see here the regulation and the legislative regulations having to catch up to technology in this reauth process.
Well, thank you. Great examples, and we'll look forward to working with you to try and come up with some better outcomes when you interact with FRA in the future. Mr. Peters.
Thank you again for each of your testimony. And one thing that occurred in each of your testimonies is you discussed the importance of the down payment that the bipartisan infrastructure law made in our rail infrastructure. But what I also heard is that the job is clearly not done yet. The bill certainly provided certainty by giving advanced appropriations to key rail programs like CRISI. Mr. Gilbertson, you mentioned that in particular in your testimony. And the rail crossing elimination program, This means that that for the last few years, these programs have not been reliant on yearly appropriations process. And I'm very concerned about the funding cliff that we're approaching with these programs when the BIL expires next year. Without advanced appropriations, the only way to avoid a huge funding cliff is for our rail network, for their yearly appropriations budget, to plus up rail infrastructure funding by the billions. That will be difficult in our current budgetary environment to do that. So if I could hear briefly from each of you, from each member of this panel, what do you believe are the major consequences if Congress allows rail infrastructure funding to basically run off this cliff? What are the downsides that we need to know about? Mr. Jeffries, you want to start, and we'll work down the panel. Absolutely, thanks.
So certainly, you know from talking to us many times, we're very proud of all the private investment we put into the network. At the same time, we do a major project with states, communities, municipalities, partnering with them to do projects that probably otherwise wouldn't be done. And these are projects of national significance, regional significance, increased freight flows, increased safety. And so the primary source for the public entities to tap into is it's the Grade Crossing Elimination Program, it's infra, it's mega. On the short lines primarily, it's CRISI. And so my concern, if you let those programs be dormant or stagnate, is that there's going to be a lot of missed opportunities to partner with public agencies throughout the entire country. You've seen how oversubscribed these programs are to do projects that otherwise may not get done, that will have real benefits to cities and towns across the U.S. and the movement of freight, goods, and people.
Very good. Mr. Gilbertson.
I would just echo that and say that the advance appropriations are really critical. There's a planning function, particularly for small carriers, where you have a work window that's defined by climate sometimes. I mean, we have 4 months where we can do the work. If you miss that cycle, you miss a year. Similarly, there's often lining up non-federal partners that includes the private entity, but also public entities in some cases. And again, anything that adds to the complexity of that may mean it doesn't happen at all.
Very good. Mr. Trumper.
Thank you, Senator Peters. I'd mention two things. Number one, infrastructure built today is cheaper than infrastructure built tomorrow. And so any delay in being able to fund these programs and get the work done not only causes the delay, but rises the cost for them in the future. Second, with respect to Brightline, both ourselves, the state DOT, the local communities have tapped into these programs for safety programs. And we look at safety from an engineering, education, and an enforcement standpoint. And so law enforcement have been using these grants to warn and blitz grade crossings. We've all talked about the impact of grade crossing safety. They've used these grants to go above and beyond the Federal Railroad Administration regulations for crossing safety improvements. And they've also used these grants from an education standpoint for public service announcements, et cetera. And so my fear is if you pull back on funding, you would also see an increase in safety incidents.
All right, we're real concerned. Mr. Anthony, the last word.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, we need certainty of funding. It helps the local communities and the rail industries to be able to plan. It helps us to be able to look in ways to create the new workforce and what is needed in communities, towns, and villages, especially rural and small communities. It also is important to note that all types of the infrastructure programs that we have has a trust fund or other long-term funding commitments. And if we had that mechanism long-term for rail industry development and community engagement and local leadership involvement, I think we could plan better as a nation.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Chairman Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the chairman for hosting this hearing. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Jeffries, let me start with you. The Does AAR have any recommendations for this committee to stop freight theft? For example, would requiring DOT and DOJ to better coordinate when they receive information on freight theft help tackle this problem?
We absolutely have recommendations, and this is an issue that plagues not only the railroads, but the entire supply chain, and it's not going away. It's only getting bigger. Our adversaries are very organized criminal enterprises, strategically hitting high-value cargo. So first of all, thank you to you for your support on the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. Thank you to others on the committee as well. We've got very good bipartisan support. That bill does three things. It increases information sharing across government. It creates investigatory motivation with the feds, and then it really pushes for some enforcement because oftentimes we arrest people and they're right back out on the street. Information, as you mentioned, information sharing is key. Coordination, DOT, DOJ. I'd throw DHS in there as well because they're kind of at the tip of the spear with a lot of that. Absolutely, we support it. Thank you for your support, and we want to keep working with this committee to address this problem.
Excellent, very helpful. Mr. Gilbertson, the Department of Transportation under Biden added both DEI and climate change-related criteria to the grant approval process, which Congress did not include in the authorizing statutes. For example, the Biden DOT thought of the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure Safety Improvement, or CRISI grant, as a program to, quote, explicitly address climate change, gender equity, and racial equity, and scored applications based on how well the applicant met these criteria. In fact, the Biden DOT required applicants to address, quote, equity as a condition of receiving construction funds. Mr. Gilbertson, are you aware of the challenges short-line railroads faced when applying for grants requiring such criteria that were unrelated to the merits of the actual project?
Senator, I previously mentioned that the CRISI grant approval process has been unnecessarily long, in our opinion. I'm not aware of the internal decision-making of how FRA has weighted these factors, but as a matter of policy, we would ask that the FRA limit its evaluation to the statutory criteria.
Asking that the government follow the law seems a pretty reasonable request from American citizens, and one would, I for one am grateful we now have an administration willing to follow the law instead of the preceding administration. Mr. Cumber, you talked about the acquisition of right-of-way as a major challenge to expanding Brightline in Florida. Brightline West is taking a creative approach by working with the state departments of transportation to build track along existing right-of-way. If Congress wanted to incentivize greater competition in the inner-city passenger rail sector, what should we be thinking about regarding right-of-way acquisition? You get your microphone.
Great question, Chairman Cruz. There are a couple ideas that we have. The first is using the categorical exclusions to allow projects to move forward when they're in existing transportation corridors would significantly reduce the time it would take to implement projects. A normal kind of arc of a project is, if you think about 3 years of pre-development work, 5 years to construct, 3 years to get to stabilization, any extra time it takes to get that environmental process completed makes the project sometimes not financially feasible. Second, when it comes to the grant programs, our view is give the private sector the eligibility to apply for all the different US DOT and FRA grant programs. And I said that in my oral testimony. We just want all passenger models to be treated equally. Amtrak can compete, state-sponsored systems can compete, privately operated systems can compete. And if we have a level playing field, we think the benefits of getting competition into the passenger rail industry will happen.
And let me follow up. What could Congress do to help facilitate more private sector participation to promote competition in inner city passenger rail in this country? And Mr. Jeffries, I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well. But Mr. Cumber.
So I strongly believe, obviously, competition makes everyone better. And there is a association out there that it's the Association for Innovative Passenger Rail Operations. And what they've been pushing for is when long-distance systems are being contemplated using federal funds, that they would have to be competed as opposed to Amtrak being the default operator. And that's something that I think in the reauthorization process, the committee could consider.
Mr. Jeffries?
Yeah, I think competition is good on that front. I also think getting all the stakeholders together before you launch on a project is really helpful, because oftentimes it involves a state, a municipality, a private entity, a host railroad perhaps, and getting everybody together before you roll out on new passenger projects results in a better outcome at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Cruz. Ranking Member Cantwell, you're now recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gilbertson, these infrastructure investments are critical for competition for our many different agriculture products that we grow and export. As I mentioned in my earlier statement, a lot of it comes from the Midwest to Asia through our ports. Port of Longview and Kalama and Vancouver exported 9 million tons of corn, 8 metric tons of wheat, 7 million metric tons of soybeans, again, $6 billion. So we wanted to get there. How do investments in the rail crossing and short line help improve that competitiveness for farmers? And what happens if we lose the $1 billion of investments that we've made so far?
Well, the short lines are critical to that agricultural supply chain. And as you know, the state-of-the-art is a grain car that will hold 100 tons, a 286,000-pound car. And some of the short line spinoffs could not handle a car of that weight. So that essentially precluded these railroads from participating in that supply chain. We have an example of our Northern Lines Railway, which is in Minnesota, originates grain shuttle trains that go to the Pacific Northwest ports. And that infrastructure had to be improved to handle those heavier cars. Had we not done that, we would not be a participant in that business to your ports.
So if we didn't have the $1 billion, we'd be less competitive.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, I could be advocating that we should double the number, because I see some nods in the audience, because that's how much the competition is, and that's what we have to do to get product to their destination. And so I'm a big fan of increasing infrastructure investment. That's one of the reasons I'm happy that we're having this hearing, because we know what we've delivered so far. We know that it helped, but yet we're in this environment where we're challenged. Tariffs, cost on infrastructure, all that makes it. So let's at least get the infrastructure investment right. Mr. Anthony, we have one city, Washougal, which is one of the busiest BNSF lines in the nation. Over 30 trains transporting 50% of all rail freight that moves through the state of Washington, basically bottlenecked in this town. And because of that, literally traffic was backing up on Highway 14. It was just ridiculous. So we ended up getting money to improve that, and these improvements have made things a lot better. But we know that we have a demand for this at-grade crossing problem. And what do you think we should do to increase? I mean, I think you could basically increase it 3 times and probably still have a very good economic impact. I don't know what other people say about this. Everybody's affected by it.
Well, first of all, I guess that's a good problem to have in some ways for some communities, but it has to be planned and coordinated with the local governments within the region. As it relates to the safety concerns that we would have on that is engaging the community to make sure that the first responders and the medical professionals and the families that are trying to take their kids to school, that they don't have 2 to 3, 4 hours blocked intersections, which really has impacted the lives of residents in and out of the region. the stories that we're hearing of residents crawling through trains to get to their jobs, having to go 2 miles to another medical facility because they can't get to the existing one. So all local government is saying is that we want to partner with the rail industry to make sure that the artificial intelligence and other information that they're using to plan includes access and information loaded in that system from local communities. So we want to
You
say
support more money for?
100%.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because
100%.
I need you to say.
Yes, we support more money.
I mean, I've talked about this issue so long in my state that someone visiting one of my neighbors stopped me on the street and said, do you know what happens in California? I said, no, what? And they said, literally, the trucks can't deliver the product to the port.
Right.
And they're outside, the train is blocking. Literally, people will get out of their truck and walk to go put their time card in to show that they showed up on time, and then walk all the way back and get back in their truck. So this is, beyond this community problem. This is about us being very competitive. We worry about this because we have Prince Rupert, Vancouver, British Columbia, and somebody can make another choice. So this is about making this investment. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just will say for the record, I like your comments on full understanding of what is being moved through the communities. That requirement of communication between city leadership and railroads and first responders is critical. So thank you for that testimony.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Senator Moreno, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Jeffries, you talked about modernization. We go back to that. Obviously, it's a theme that we're hearing over and over again in this hearing. And you said the regulations were mostly designed in the 1970s. Is that correct?
At least in some cases, if not before and since, but we're a legacy industry with legacy regulations.
Gotcha. So we haven't really done much in Congress in that period of time?
I think Congress has done and has tried to do a lot of things. A lot of it's been around funding. The challenge is, I think you often try to regulate for the current condition. And so, for example, I talked about autonomous track inspection. That's today's technology. But I would be hesitant to say, oh, let's say that you have to use ATI to do track inspections because that locks you into today's practice. So that's why we're focused on outcomes-based, not inputs-based. Where do we want to go? And let's continue to evolve how we can best get there.
Gotcha. It seems like we may be overdue for some regulatory changes since the 70s was a decent period of time ago. You talked about the Highway Trust Fund. Just come for the record for the people watching, how does that interplay with rail service?
Sure. So our biggest partner, also our biggest competitor, is the commercial trucking industry. And we've actually worked closer together than we ever did, but we're also highly competitive in certain markets. And so, as you've heard me say, we're very proud of the fact that we invest almost entirely on our own dime back into our network, where truckers operate over infrastructure paid for by the Highway Trust Fund. And that's all well and good when those fees cover the cost of the highways themselves. But what we've seen is more and more and more and more shortfalls, so that general fund transfers are required to fund the highway network. And when that happens, that's a subsidy to what our competitors are paying into the infrastructure they operate. And so all we're looking for is a competitive playing field where each side puts in the appropriate amount of cash over the infrastructure that it operates.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So for example, if the Highway Trust Fund were to run out of money, which it seems like that's something we've been talking about for a long time, that's problematic, obviously, right? Understatement.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you have vehicles on the road that are not paying gas tax at all, that's a problem.
Yes.
Right? So if you were to create legislation or federal policy that bans internal combustion engine cars, would that increase the Federal Highway Trust Fund or decrease it?
I think that would be problematic, to say the
That would
least.
be problematic. Well, the previous administration wanted to ban ICE cars as of 2035. Fortunately, we were able to get rid of that through a Congressional Review Act a couple weeks ago. Huge deal. We no longer have EV mandates. Would it make sense, though, if we could raise money into the fund to say, hey, we're going to charge maybe a $500 one-time fee for battery electric vehicles since they're paying zero gas tax? Would that be not only good for the industry, but just fair for people who are paying a gas tax versus people who aren't?
I think whether it's autos or trucks or any other form of transportation using the highways, we think it's appropriate that they pay for the infrastructure wear and tear they cause.
Gotcha. Well, I'm hoping that in the big beautiful bill, we can put in a $500 one-time fee for battery electric vehicles, $250 for hybrids. It will raise over $12 billion over the budget window and start addressing some of that shortfall. So I urge my colleagues to consider making that happen. If I could switch to you, Mr. Gilbertson, in your mind, what's holding back innovation in your industry? Like, what's the main impediment to innovation?
Senator, it's a good question. I'm not sure there's a clear answer. I mean, there's a financial component to it. There is a regulatory component to it, and there is innovation occurring. As I mentioned, it's powerful. It not only improves safety, it improves our offering to our customer, and we absolutely need to do it. When you know the delivery minute of your pizza, but we can't tell you the delivery day of a rail car, we have a problem.
Very aware. When I was in the retail automotive business, we would, of course, always be delayed by the cars that were sold, and the cars that we didn't want arrived immediately and on time. So, question for you, Mr. Cumber. I want to emphasize there's clearly a difference between freight, and the government doesn't own any freight trains, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Gotcha. Okay, because thank God we'd lose hundreds of billions of dollars there. But we do own or are responsible to fund Amtrak, correct?
Correct.
So I grew up in South Florida, so you don't have to ask me to visit, although this time of year it's insanely hot, even by DC standards. But if I were to go from Miami to Orlando, I have two choices for rail. I can go on Amtrak and go on Brightline. What's the average speed that you travel between Miami and Orlando?
Our trains go about 110 miles an hour.
And what's the average speed of Amtrak?
I believe it's somewhere in the 40 to 50 mile per hour.
Gotcha. So you can get to Miami, Orlando in about 3 hours with Brightline, 7.5 hours on Amtrak.
And if I could add one more thing to that, I believe Amtrak runs twice a day. We run 36 trains, one-way trains between Miami and Orlando. So the frequency is a big difference too.
Gotcha. I know over time, so I'm going to cut to the chase of my line of questioning. But you look at the stations, the modern cabin. I'm not trying to do a commercial for Brightline, but it is night and day. It reminds me of a Russian car from the 70s versus a modern vehicle today. Why are we even in this business? Why are we subsidizing or owning passenger rail in America when we're terrible at it? The government is objectively really, really bad at running that. If we had government airlines, holy Lord, could you imagine what that would look like? Why don't we just get out of that business completely, let the private sector run it? Is that something that I'd ask all four of you just to quickly comment? Does that seem like a reasonable approach to just say, we've given it the freshman try, like I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years. It's not worked. We've lost hundreds of billions of dollars and objectively provide terrible service. Going 40 miles an hour from Miami to Orlando is insane. No, nobody wants to answer that question.
Well, Senator, I'll just say I'm from South Florida, too. I'm from Belglade, Palm Beach County, Florida, and I've ridden Brightline. I think a public-private partnership, local leaders are not opposed to that. They just want partners. And I would be very open to our members considering that.
I would just add that, it probably depends on the situation, right? Because what the motivation is. Is it a public service or is it a private enterprise? And in certain parts of the country where Mr. Hussein's operating, for example, and I bet he wants to expand to other areas, there's lots of opportunity for private enterprise to thrive. Congress has made the decision that it also wants to provide other services that are going to be inherently money losing. And as long as that's the point of view, then that service needs to be provided as well. So it's probably not a either or, it's probably a situational situation.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is that providing air travel is also a public service, but there's no government-owned airline for good reason. So, Chairman, I'm over my time, but thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lujan, you're recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jeffries, as you may be aware, I've pushed for robust funding and support for Amtrak to improve and expand our nation's long-distance rail network. I've heard story after story about horrific tragedies that should have been able to be prevented, delays, cancellations. Now, in 2023, the Southwest Chief had the second lowest on-time performance rate of all the long-distance routes, getting customers to their destinations on time only 34% of the time. And in 2024, we saw a modest improvement to 45%. As you know, this is not just an issue for us in New Mexico. My colleagues in Kansas and in other states, it's generally Senator Moran that will pull us all in to have conversations about the Southwest Chief as well. Many Amtrak routes like the Southwest Chief suffer poor on-time performance in part because they operate primarily on tracks owned and dispatched by freight railroads. Multiple members of AAR, including Norfolk Southern and Union Pacific, have been the focus of federal investigations due to their role in Amtrak's poor on-time performance. My question is, how is AAR pushing its members to ensure Amtrak has preference over freight transportation as required by law?
Thank you for that question, and there's many aspects to it. So, Congress sometime back required that the DOT create regulations defining on-time performance, and the DOT did that a few years ago. And following that, the host railroads and Amtrak got together and said, okay, given that this is the world we're operating under, let's figure out the schedules that make sense, because some of those schedules hadn't been updated for decades. And so almost every route has now an agreed upon schedule so that the host and Amtrak can at least are operating from the same terms of what's on time, what's not. And while we've seen a lot of progress in a lot of areas, I just got a presentation from the Amtrak president last week. Certainly long distance routes and the Southwest Chief in particular, we haven't seen the progress that we've seen in the state-supported routes, for example. It is incumbent that we provide the appropriate level of preference. Now, preference means that, I think there's different points of view. Preference, in our view, means reasonably providing Amtrak preference to move ahead, so pulling over trains to allow for Amtrak to proceed. What it doesn't mean is kind of a Cadillac motorcade where everything is cleared out and everything stops while the Amtrak train moves forward. So there's a balancing act there. We're not where we want to be, not where we need to be, especially with long distance. So the work continues. I am encouraged by the trend lines going in the right direction. Not nearly as steep as I know folks like yourself and Mr. Moran and others would like to see, and certainly aware of that. So we've got to keep working. There's probably some infrastructure investment required in certain areas to build out additional sidings, et cetera, especially in rural areas that have single lines to allow for trains to get out of the way. But we've got more work to do, and we'll keep working it.
Appreciate that. Mr. Anthony, last year, BNSF Railways Freight Trail derailed near Manuelito, New Mexico, near Navajo tribal lands. 2 of the train cars caught fire, which caused the evacuation of nearby families. However, authorities were significantly delayed in alerting nearby Navajo members. In your written testimony, you mentioned a need for improvement in information sharing between railroads, city leadership, local first responders, and I would add tribal authorities to the list. Can you speak more about specific initiatives that could help get information out faster to those impacted?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. We truly believe that local government, the first responders, the medical professionals should be as a part of the communication plan for the railroad industry. We think that as apps are developed, as AI is utilized, local leaders need to be at the table. What we're seeing, though, is again where communities are being economically impacted in a negative way because 6 to sometimes 2 to 6 hours of a blockage has caused families not to be able to get to work and medical responders not to be able to support the lives of those in that community. And so we are saying that it has to start with local communication, local engagement, because communities are being economically destroyed because many of the rail systems aren't communicating with them, and tribal communities.
I appreciate that, sir. Mr. Cumber, I appreciate the work your company's done to expand railways to multiple communities in Florida, Nevada, and California. However, I do have a concern that rapid expansion is done sometimes at the expense of safety. On average, Brightline has more than 11 times the incidence of Amtrak and over 4 times as many that led to injury or death. What is your company doing to improve safety on your railroads, and what promises can you make to this committee going forward?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So safety is and always will be the #1 priority for Brightline. Trespassing activity has been the root cause of each and every incident along our corridor. Our Florida project has 331 active grade crossings, and we are in the process of making improvements to every single one of those crossings. Both the state DOT and local communities and ourselves and the Federal Railroad Administration have come together where there will be $65 million in improvements made over the next 2 years at those crossings. That is possible because of the grant programs that this committee has created, where we've been able to partner and make those improvements. I will tell you our Brightline West project will have 0 grade crossings because we're in the median of the highway. And so any future project that Brightline looks at, we're going to first be looking at right-of-way options to create sealed corridors instead of having corridors where there would be a significant number of grade crossings. The other thing that's important to mention is, I'm not going to sit here and say that the initiatives that we've come up with, raised medians, exit gates, delineators in the highway, are the final solution. We need to work together to find new ideas, and we at Brightline have an open door policy that we will meet with any company that has a technology or physical solution to stop trespassers from coming into the corridor. And I want to commend the Federal Railroad Administration and our state DOT in Florida, who have said that if we find programs that we can pilot in the corridor, that they will partner with us to fund those. And so, I want to make that very clear that for people that are even watching this, we have an open door policy that that technology is one of the solutions, but there's also probably some physical solutions out there as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kim, you're recognized for questions.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Anthony, I just want to pick off where my colleague left off. You talked about some of the problems that come with delays and other challenges, workers not being able to get to work. I mean, we have a lot of problems with that in New Jersey, a lot of difficulties on that front. And I think just in general with the Northeast Corridor, I just wanted to ask you, do you agree that the Northeast Corridor is critical for our nation's economic strength and security?
Yes.
Now, I guess I'd just like to think through what are the types of steps that we need to do to be able to further ensure that. And one of the things that we tried to do here in Congress was through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I guess I just wanted to ask you to share how that law supported much needed updates to the Northeast Corridor and why those investments are crucial for our rail system.
Well, for local communities to be able to have a rail stop in their community, it means a lot. It means more jobs, more innovation, more money in the communities for investment and reinvestment. Small businesses prosper because of a hub being created and a stop in that community. But it also means, in some ways, that they need to be more engaged in the planning and the stop in the rail stop in their communities. And that's what we're fighting for as local leaders, is just making sure that we do recognize that it's important, but it also has to be planned and developed within our community, and we need that support.
And have it thought through with a sense of strategy, right? A sense of coordination and purpose. Do you feel like the bipartisan infrastructure law was successful in trying to start that process for another generation of changes? We do think that, and we've been very supportive with USDOT to make sure that it's implemented effectively in communities. But clearly not, clearly the work is not done though, right? Like there's more that we need to continue on to. And in particular, I just wanted to ask, we have tried to engage in advance appropriations through the bipartisan infrastructure law for entities like Amtrak to supercharge our capital investments like state of good repairs. Are those the types of things that you are hoping that we are continuing forward to be able to help support some of these advancements?
Yes, we need continued funding.
When I think through the challenges that we face, for instance, in New Jersey, and we were entering into hurricane season, we've had a lot of disruptions in the past when it comes to transit and whatnot due to the storms, and across this country, we have a lot of different issues that are out there. How important is it for us to think through climate resilience when it comes to what comes next for a strong and effective rail system, Mr. Anthony?
I think sustainability, climate resistance has to be considered as a part of any plan for rail investment and rail development. And our local communities are working with the rail industry to be able to bring those types of issues into the conversation.
Yeah, Mr. Jeffries, do you agree with that? I mean, when we're trying to think through how to be able to move this forward, I'm trying to think through how are we prioritizing the need for that resilience, especially when we worry about disasters and other types of means.
Sure. From the freight perspective, one of the things we're most proud of is following a hurricane, for example. We're often the first mode that's back up and running. But we're investing across the network in particularly sensitive areas. Think about, Louisiana Basin, for example, to raise tracks, literally increase the amount of ballast so tracks are higher off the ground. So when we do experience flooding events, we're allowed to continue to provide service to customers and communities in which we operate. And that's a long-term project. When you're thinking about the NEC, New York in particular, obviously those infrastructure challenges are a completely different animal. But as you make these generational investments to replace Portal Bridge, for example, to build in the new tunnels, that's got to be a consideration, right? You've got to have a more robust product out there that allows the passenger side to continue to operate in rough conditions or get back online more quickly and have that infrastructure hardened, especially the electronic side of it all, so that it doesn't get knocked out for an extended period of time.
Yeah, I mean, that has been part of what we were thinking about with the Gateway Project and others, trying to make sure this is resilient given what we said about the critical nature. Mr. Jeffries, are there other types besides raising the rails and others? Are there other types of resilient steps you think we need to be prioritizing as we're thinking about it here in the Senate?
I mean, I think about it as operational resilience and infrastructure resilience. So operationally, the better information we have as far as weather events, et cetera, the better we can plan and pre-position assets. We're certainly not the airline industry. It takes more than one night to reposition things, but we can take steps in advance, get our assets out of harm's way so that we can bring them back in shortly after. On the investment side, it is really about, I think, partnering with communities to ensure what their needs are and identifying those high impact projects and making sure you reduce the amount of time or the amount of negative impacts so that we can continue to serve communities, because it's immediately during and after major weather events that communities are in the most need, and often the rail is the best way to get in there, so we want to make sure we can continue to do that.
Great, thank you. And with that, I'll yield back.
I'll welcome a second round of questions for those members that want to ask them. I have one theme I'd like to pick up on, and that is overly prescriptive rules, outdated rules, things that inhibit innovation and operational capacity. If I were to give you 30 seconds, Mr. Jeffries and Mr. Gilbertson and Cumber, you may have thoughts along these lines as well, but 30 seconds. Are there any specific or outdated rules or regulations you'd just like to underscore the importance of revisiting or potentially even eliminating to facilitate more innovation in the industry?
Well, we hit on track. Signal inspections, locomotive inspections, brake inspections, the list goes on. It's basically every aspect of our operations which is done in a backwards-looking manual way. And there should be nothing controversial about looking forward in a regulatory structure. Again, we're talking about outcomes-based regulations that advance safety in a data-driven way. That should be very straightforward. And so we're looking across the regulatory spectrum. And the way to do this, if you give me 1 second, the way to do this is by effective pilot and waiver programs that are judged clearly and transparently, allowed you to build data sets. Last administration, we weren't even getting programs rejected. We just weren't getting answers, so much so that we had to go to court to get an answer on 6 different requests. And then they were promptly granted. We didn't even have to litigate because it was politically motivated. It was not a safety issue.
Obviously
Thank you.
Unacceptable. Mr. Gilbertson.
I would just echo the waiver process is crucial. It permits us to experiment in a narrow, defined, data-defined way. If it works, let's share that information. If it doesn't, we're not changing the system.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Cumber, do you feel like you have anything to add here? Yes, sir.
The only thing I'd add is the waiver process that everyone has mentioned. I think there needs to be clear timelines behind it. And right now, when a waiver is requested from FRA, there is no prescribed timeline as to when it needs to be decided.
Thank you. Mr. Anthony?
I would say we're supportive of streamlining the process for infrastructure projects as long as it does not neglect the environmental impacts.
Excellent. Mr. Moreno, Senator.
So just quick final round of questioning. I think it bridges, Mr. Chairman, to what I think we can have as our next hearing. So, Mr. Cumber, obviously, I'm going to give you an obvious question. Passenger rail, no matter how well it's done, no matter how robust the private sector creates, you're not going to solve the problem of everybody being able to get from point A to point B where they need to go, correct?
Correct.
So there's this great business called the automobile business that allows you to do that. So, Mr. Anthony, I'm going to go back to you because you're the one person that's looking at more of a wider aperture here. Because for you, I think you would agree that a big priority's got to be, you got to connect jobs and people. Really important. Would you agree? Want to expand on that?
Yes, I do think that's very important, and that's why we think there should be a connection to the transit systems, whether it's the airport, whether it's rail, whether it's Brightline, and that mid-connection is important because it's used for families to be able to have quicker access to their kids, schools, travel. So we're very supportive of that because it does create job and opportunities for communities.
But a good old-fashioned automobile is what it really allows you to go from point A to point B very efficiently. And if you look at like in cities like Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati, where there's massive teen unemployment, being able to have an affordable way to get to work is really important because you don't always know where the jobs are going to be. Sometimes they end up being in the suburbs and there's no mass transit connection. Right. And there's massive disparities when somebody's got to take 4 or 5 buses or a train to get from point A to point B to get to work. Something happens, they show up late, they end up being fired. I mean, those are problems that you see every day, right? So one of the things that I'm concerned about, Mr. Chairman, this is where I was getting to, is in the last 4 years, the average price of an automobile went up $8,000. $8,000. The average price of a car is now $50,000. There's virtually no new cars sold that are less than $25,000. The average used car is now in the 20s. I used to be in the car business, and we'd have a part of our website that says cars that you can buy under 10 grand, which are the cars that those teenagers need to get into the workforce. That doesn't, there is no such, it is gone. There's not even cars under $20,000 that are reasonable to get. And I think, Mr. Chairman, one of the things I'm getting to here is I would urge you to have, let's have a hearing to talk about what we can do here in the federal government to stimulate a ecosystem that allows this country to go back to be able to make affordable automobiles for working Americans and for families. Because if you look at the average car payment, Mr. Anthony, I'll have you end with this. How many people do you know that are working Americans that can afford a $650 a month car payment?
Wow, that's pretty high, Senator. I can't give you a number on that.
Pretty low, right?
Pretty low, yeah.
We're excluding a huge portion of the population from affordable transportation. I'd urge us to have a hearing on that, what we can do. And it's, I'll give you the headlines. It's over-regulation by the federal government, obscenely stupid mandates, features on automobiles that are totally unnecessary that's driving up the price of cars. You know, there's been a lot of talk about this bipartisan infrastructure law that passed. In that law, there's a detection device that's going to be required on automobiles to detect whether you're impaired. I don't even drink. Why in the heck am I paying for a detection device in my automobile to see if I've drank alcohol? That adds enormous cost to the price of automobiles. So we really, I would just urge you again, I don't think if I've made my case clear, that we should have a hearing on the price of automobiles.
Well, I thank you, Senator Moreno. And I would say, I too have been in the automobile business. In fact, I'm very much in it right now because I have 4 teenage children. and I feel deeply in the auto business, so I have every incentive to make sure that we adopt the smartest policies for middle-class families when it comes to this. Thanks so much for your leadership on this issue. Senator Markey is recognized to ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And I'm glad this committee is kicking off its surface transportation reauthorization process with a hearing about rail. The bipartisan infrastructure law provided a down payment on modernizing our rail system. This law has helped jumpstart exciting projects across the country, including the long-held dream of West-East Rail across Massachusetts. But this work is only just leaving the station. We must continue to invest in rail to advance many of these critical projects. Mr. Anthony, do you agree that the next surface transportation bill should continue the infrastructure law's significant long-term funding for rail?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Do you agree that pulling back on rail funding could discourage communities from launching future ambitious rail projects due to concerns that federal support is unreliable?
Yes, sir.
So as we make these transformative investments in our rail system, it's crucial that we invest in rail electrification. Mr. Cumber, your company is currently building a high-speed electrified rail line between Southern California and Las Vegas. What are the specific benefits of an electrified rail line for this project?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. So there's definitely a need for electrified trains in the U.S., and it's for several reasons. Number one, for the system that we're building in Brightline West, you need the acceleration. They're lighter weight, so you can get to the 200-mile-per-hour speeds. You have the horsepower and torque as well, and you can take larger grades. And so when you're going through geography like the Coahome Pass, you would not be able to do that with a diesel train or a hydrogen-powered train.
Yeah, so higher speeds, faster acceleration, better torque to traverse difficult terrain, and it also cleans our air and eliminates emissions and delivers a better rail system overall. And that's why I'm soon going to be reintroducing my All Aboard Act, which would invest over $200 billion over 5 years in America's rail network. The bill would build on the infrastructure law by providing billions to build and operate high-speed rail, expanding existing passenger rail service, and improving rail safety. And would also invest in electrifying the highest traffic corridors of our nation. The All Aboard Act sends the message that our investment in rail is picking up speed, not hitting the brakes. And I look forward to working with the committee on this issue during the reauthorization process. So let's turn to workers who keep our trains running. Mr. Cumber, although Brightline has an excellent relationship with its 13 rail unions out west, in Florida, Brightline's operations have been starkly different. In Florida, Brightline has aggressively sought to overturn a successful organizing drive by its operation workers under the Railway Labor Act. Brightline argues that it is not subject to the Railway Labor Act and therefore its workers cannot organize under the law. That is unacceptable. Under federal law, any company that accepts a grant from the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Program is subject to the Railway Labor Act. Mr. Cumber, did Brightline accept that grant for its Florida line from the Consolidated Rail and Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Bill?
Thank you, Senator. So yes, we did, and I want to be very clear that Brightline fully supports the right of our teammates to seek union representation. We simply believe in this case that the National Mediation Board did not have jurisdiction here, and that the carrier, that Brightline Florida is not a carrier subject to the RLA, and so those activities should have been conducted under the auspices of the National Labor Relations Board. I want to be clear that this is a jurisdictional dispute. This is not a dispute on whether we want our employees to have the ability to organize.
Well, you know, as you know, most recently the National Mediation Board, which mediates disputes between railroads and their workers, ruled in favor of the workers. And from my perspective, that should be the end of the matter. I understand that you're trying to make this into a procedural issue, but there's been a substantive decision against you, you know, on behalf of the workers. And what you're doing is actually prolonging this this process, and I just want to make the point that I just disagree with you. And in terms of having devices in automobiles that detect alcohol, it's really intended for safety purposes. 40,000 people died in auto accidents last year, and many of them are younger people. And who just are kind of getting introduced to driving and to alcohol, and the fact that these cars would then be protected against the accidents that sometimes occur, I think is a good thing. And I don't think that we should be repealing that kind of a protection. And I just wanted to put that up because I was a part of the team that put that regulation on the books. So let me just turn back to you, Mr. Chairman, with thanks.
Well, thank you, Senator Markey, for those questions. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for your important testimony today. I think the members have learned a lot. And my hope is that we might stay in touch as we work on this important reauthorization legislation. So we will look forward to further counsel from you and others in your organization. Senators will have until close of business on Wednesday, June 25, to submit questions for the record. The witnesses will have until the end of the day on Wednesday, July 9, to respond to those questions. This concludes today's hearing. This committee stands adjourned.